Hello, my name's Lana. I'm one of this year's Patterns of Fashion finalists, here today to talk to you about my recreation project, this 1820s frock coat from Nora Wall's book, The Cut of Men's Clothes. The original coat, currently housed in the V&A collection, is dated between 1820 and 1830. It is described by Nora Wall as a light fawn woolen cloth, unlined except for the front skirts, which are lined in cotton. The facings are made of a darker fawn silk velvet, and edges are bound in narrow, darker fawn silk. The buttons, the same colour in basket weave. My recreation of this frock coat is also made of a wool, faced with cotton velvet, edged with a silk twill and lined with a plain cotton, all stitched using 1820s appropriate sewing methods, meaning everything was done by hand with a needle, a thimble, and either linen thread or silk thread. My priorities when sourcing the materials for this project was for all the fabrics to behave similarly to the extant, not only visually, but also considering the qualities of the fabric that would influence its behavior during the construction process. The wool was chosen not only to match the original weight for drape, but crucially to match the density of the fibres in the extant cloth, as the non-fraying qualities of historical tailoring wools made it common practice in this era to leave seam allowances raw and exposed in tailored garments. The other fabrics used for this project, a sturdy plain weave cotton linen, short pile cotton velvet, and twill weave silk, required additional preparation after purchasing before they could be cut and sewn to the wool. Each fabric was hand-dyed, the silk was then further prepared with light starching to strengthen the thin edging strips, and the cotton velvet, which had a distinct nap, required a steam and tumble dry in order to raise the pile to best mimic the look of 19th century silk velvets. In my research of the era's tailored garments, I had the chance to handle pieces from the latter half of the century, but my research pertaining to the actual hand-stitching process for pre-sewing machine tailoring was a much harder task. I was unable to view any pieces in person from this era, and contemporary publications relating to tailoring focus almost entirely on the methodology for pattern cutting, leaving any details of the actual construction quite far out of print. My main source for this information was the 2015 DAR publication called An Agreeable Tyrant. This book was an invaluable source of information on Regency typical materials, layering and pad stitching, as well as types of stitches used to secure different parts of the garment. Even multiple descriptions of stitch lengths for different fabric types and thread weights. Referencing this information, I completed the majority of the coat using a stitch length of 12 to 15 back stitches per inch. I did this using wax linen thread and also made the decision, after seeing the same execution in numerous contemporary coats, to use a linen canvas in the chest and collar between the wool and velvet facings. The final frontier regarding the creation of this coat was the thread woven buttons. Now, in the era, it's not likely that a tailor would have also added these very finely hand-woven buttons to his workload, but I was determined to dive into the research and attempt a recreation of this lesser-known accessory. I had to learn from scratch all the methods involved in weaving buttons, going into depth at every step and with every technique, as I not only had to learn these new weaves and stitches, but I also had to understand the process intimately enough to reverse engineer the coat button design based solely on the V&A's image. I created multiple test buttons before I realised the exact design on the extant. The rest of the buttons on the coat front are just covered in the silk twill that was used on the edging, a method that was also common in the era. Overall, I'm beyond pleased with this experience and the outcome. Despite its rather sparse documentation in The Cut of Men's Clothes, I chose to take on this frock coat recreation because I was determined to expand my knowledge of 19th century menswear. In the future, I'm looking forward to taking every opportunity to further my practice, and I am so grateful to have been chosen as a finalist for the 2025 Patterns of Fashion competition. Thank you, Costume Society, for having me.
My name is Verity Joy, and I recreated the circa 1824 to 27 pelisse robe in acid green silk from Janet Arnold's Patterns of Fashion 1. Part of the Salisbury Museum collection, I was initially drawn to this garment due to its intricate construction and the fact it was made entirely by hand. To begin the process, I started by modelling the pattern in paper to get a sense of how it would work in 3D. As we're now fortunate to have two editions of Patterns of Fashion 1, I spent quite a while comparing them as the pattern is presented differently in each. One discrepancy I found was that the labelling on the bodice pattern in the new edition didn't quite match up, so I made sure to change this for my actual dress. One of the best parts of this project was examining the original pelisse robe, for which I'm very grateful to the team at Salisbury Museum. This allowed me to observe minute details such as seam allowance depths, the fabric handle, and even colour match the samples that I took with me. I concluded that the garment was likely made by a skilled dressmaker due to its technical construction and intricate hand sewing around the bodice. This was slightly undermined by the fact there are some rather large hand stitches on the inside that you can't see right now. But through physically recreating this garment, I discovered that they are intentional and they are to accommodate the amount of bulk that they go through. The most challenging part of this project was creating the pleated panel as accurately as possible. Comparing both book editions, which present the construction differently, I undertook a series of trials investigating the pleat depth, ultimately creating my own set of instructions that brought all of this information together along with my direct observation. It is important to note that it's highly unlikely the original dressmaker spent quite this long on the mathematics, though from a historical perspective of recreation, I felt it was essential. To find out more about how the pelisse robe was made, I visited Whitchurch Silk Mill, which is only about 30 miles away from the village where the original donor of this dress lived. Specialising in silk production, it's exemplary of the type of place that this sort of silk taffeta would have been made at the time, even though it runs on electricity today. Whilst there, I had the opportunity to speak to Shannon By, a heritage weaver, who kindly examined a sample of this green silk taffeta and compared it to original photographs of the garment that I took. Whilst the original garment was my primary source of information for construction, I wanted to expand my knowledge of 19th century dressmaking techniques. So I visited the Hampshire Cultural Trust archive, where I looked at a series of different pelisse robes. This helped me identify sewing techniques common to all, and even gave me the opportunity to look at some other striped bands such as these, where instead of being secured down, they were open at the back, allowing me to see how they were made. The final mystery of this project was recreating the silk floss hem. The dress is made with a panel of silk floss at the bottom, which appeared to be industrially made and bought by the dressmaker. As silk floss fabric sadly isn't readily available today, I ultimately manufactured it myself, following many experiments in the dye room, creating the black and white striped floss using a silk screen. By using an embellishing machine, I was able to create a fabric similar to the original, but from which I could then act as the original dressmaker did by cutting it into panels and attaching it to the dress, using a series of tucks to shape it to the silhouette. To conclude, this project has been a fascinating insight into the world of historical recreation. Whilst there are some aspects I would do differently today as a 21st century dressmaker, being required to directly mirror the actions of the original dressmaker has encouraged me to engage critically with historical techniques and also interact with the wider academic discussion surrounding historical recreation. I hope that my research on this pelisse robe has uncovered at least a few of its many mysteries, showing what a fascinating piece of cultural and industrial history it is. Thank you for watching.
Hi, my name's Georgia Barclay, and I chose to recreate this set of red satin stays. The stays date to the 1630s to 1650s. The excellent garment is a very unique example for a number of reasons. The record keeping we have, which enables us to trace the lineage of the item back. The meticulous condition in which they exist today, 400 years after they were created. From the first time I found out about the competition around 2 years ago, I knew I wanted to enter with some sort of hand-sewn garment. I was fortunate enough to be able to travel to Manchester to Platt Hall. I was able to gain immense information, some of which was known from the Janet Arnold pattern, some of which was new from being able to get so up close and personal to the garment itself. The manner in which these stays were constructed is incredibly unique. They're comprised of only 2 layers, the top layer of silk and the bottom layer of linen. Through seeing them in person, I was able to spot that on the inside, the stitching that I could slightly see peeking through was in fact the back of a whip stitch, meaning that the pieces were attached wrong side to wrong side rather than the typical right side to right side. I could tell that the raw edges were not flipped inwards due to the fact that there was absolutely no bulk visible from the inside. One of the earliest problems I ran into was finding a suitable silk in which to stitch the boning channels, and I had to be specific in it given that the contrasting thread makes it so visible. I found a blue silk fabric of around the right shade, and I was then able to pull strands individually from this and cut out any imperfections, coating them in a thin, light layer of beeswax before sewing. For sewing the panels together, I used doubled over linen thread, coated heavily in beeswax, which I then put between parchment paper and ran under the iron to really get the beeswax melted into the thread rather than just coating it. Each boning channel is around 2.75 millimeters wide, totaling at 338 boning channels, all backstitched by hand. I ran into the largest problem I had with this whole project, which was the boning itself. I purchased a large bale of reed and soaked it in the tub. I next inserted one piece into each boning channel. However, this was simply too flimsy for these purposes, so I took them all out and started again with 2 pieces per boning channel. I did keep running into the problem of about halfway up, they would snap, so I figured out that if I put a piece down from the top at the same time I pushed one up from the bottom and met them in the middle, I was able to sort of ease it through the bottom. It was paramount that I included some extra fullness in the center front for the rounded busk in the center. After sewing a total of 38 eyelets down the center front, I was able to attach the gold trim. I originally attempted to make my own, however, after a day of work, I'd only sewn about 2 inches of the trim, and this is where I had to compromise and use a store-bought trim. I would like to give a special thanks to Dr. Miles Lambert of Platt Hall, Annabelle O'Doherty, and Nadia Derry III.